recognize behaviors outside of the context in which you learn them. It seems like a simple skill, but I've noticed as I've gotten better at it myself that it's actually something that a lot of people really struggle with. And I don't necessarily think that that is an indictment on those people. I'm not talking down to people. I mean, it's an important skill, and there's a lot of money in making sure that people don't develop it. That's my theory at least. But it's all tied to education. The basic premise is if you learned a concept, a word, a vocabulary word that aligns with a certain set of behaviors, would you be able to recognize those behaviors not just in the context in which you learn them? Would you also be able to recognize them in the real world? Once again, this is something that like we grew up thinking that this was not hard, right? It was like we learned about World War II in history class, English class, like basically every class in middle school had a unit on it, and we all learned the signs. We read the poem, and then when it came time to apply that knowledge to what was going on in our own country, um, a lot of people dropped the ball, and just en masse have dropped the ball. And as we react to what's going on in the news, people are dropping the ball in the other direction. It is easy to recognize fascism in a history book because they called themselves that. Some of them invented that word for their unique form of governance. And then the word stopped having meaning, right? It stopped having a meaning related to a specific form of governance and started taking on a connotation of foolishness, right? Not, and let me be clear here. It's not the people saying, it's not the people calling people fascists who are foolish necessarily. Sometimes, maybe. I mean, I've seen some people get called fascists who are just enforcing like rules in high school classrooms, which, you could talk about that in a whole different video for hours and hours, and some people make whole careers out of that. But I'm saying some people do use the word fascism foolishly. Others do not. But the association is that if you are calling someone a fascist, you probably don't know what it means, and you're just trying to be mean. Trying to trying to talk shit, which is just this ridiculous kind of double bind. I feel like I talk about double binds a lot. I just learned about them, but it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. Basically, that's how I interpreted it anyway. Um, and so it's this ridiculous situation that we've gotten ourselves into where we can't recognize fascism because we have associated it so strongly not with behaviors, actions, structures, systems, and governance. We have associated it with people, parties, places, times, and tragedy, right? It was like, oh, like there's not going to be fascism in America. We already know how that ends. Even as we take step after step towards establishing a totalitarian, authoritarian government with intense ties to corporate profits, right? Like that's kind of the original definition, is this tying in the government. It's corporate. I forget what the word for it. It was like corporate governance or something. It was like there's an original word for it that the guy who coined the term um, came up with. I gather, maybe, I don't know. I've heard he wasn't that smart either. In any case, we've associated with an aesthetic, right? And that makes it that much harder to recognize when it actually is knocking at the door. And I think we've seen that on a national scale as the people who were calling this a fascist regime, 10 years ago. I got in an argument with my friend. I think that might have been the argument that ended the friendship for a good few years, and now it's ended for forever. He did break out of one cult into another. I don't know how he votes these days, but he was saying I was being ridiculous. He was basically calling me a child for drawing parallels between the way the things that were being said in 2016 and the things that were being said in the 1930s. Um, 10 years later, it's kind of hard to see how he isn't a blibbering idiot. Sorry, that's probably a rude thing to say, but like, I don't know. It's just like this, it's this crucial ignorance in this refusal to admit that there are things that exist that call themselves one thing but actually are another, right? And this concept, this misnomer, is a word that I learned from a series of unfortunate events way back in the day. It was like there was an anaconda boa constrictor, something like that, who was named Killer or something silly, but the kids learned that it wasn't actually a killer snake. It was actually a very, very friendly snake, and that had some kind of, I don't quite remember the climax, but that had something to do with it. Someone was trying to kill the snake because it was called Killer, but they saved it because they knew that it was a misnomer. It was not actually a killer snake. They just named it Killer to be funny, right? And that's kind of how the Nazi Party originated. They called themselves the National Socialist Party because socialism was getting pretty popular. And it created this interesting dynamic where people love the policies of socialism, of Marxism. You know, if you say them individually, one at a time, a lot of people can get on board, right? It was like these very simple concepts like if the rich people continue to take larger and larger cuts of the paychecks of their workers, bad stuff's going to happen. I think at this point that's beyond arguing. And you know, it just creates this funny thing where it's like, if you say the policy, people will agree with it, and then you say that's Marxism, they'll say, "Oh, no, get that away from me," right? And if they say, you know, it's like if they say that if you give them a policy from fascism, like, okay, we're going to cut down on your ability to move around freely within your state or within the 50 states. Obviously, people on its face, without like a certain temperature in the boiling pot that we're all in, on its face, that is not a policy that many people would be like, oh yeah, we need that. You know, 5 years ago, no one was calling for that, but then it happened and everyone was ready for it, right? They were like, oh yeah, it's time to go. I saw someone got like a phone stand for their car, but it was like just for holding their passport because they were so proud that they were finally living in a fascist state. But if you ask them like if they like fascism, they're going to say no. And if you ask them if they like the policies, they're going to say no. But if you ask them how they like the system, how it's operating right now, a lot of people actually say yes. And that's it's bizarre, right? Because I think it shows this inability to take a concept that has been learned and tested, tried and true. Oh gosh, that's even worse. What am I trying to say? It's a concept that exists, right? It exists. It has had multiple iterations. People have tried it. There are different forms, but they all kind of share some similarities. And people are unable to take those similarities and apply them to something within their own life. And I think that's because in some respects, it is hard to see the way that your life is influenced by a system that we have not fully finished unpacking. I mean, what we're seeing now with the links between the movies that were being funded all the way through me growing up were connected to a certain producer. The malls that I went to growing up, fortunately, I wasn't as beholden to those trends as the women in my peer group, fortunately, you know, but that was still like a major part of the culture, and that's all getting linked to some, you know, it's just there's all these the culture wars, so much of that is getting linked to just like rich powerful men playing chess with disposable pieces, but the pieces are us, and we didn't consent to being pieces or disposable. But you would think that once we realize that's what's going on, we would do something about it, right? That's where people are getting stuck. Is this people know what's going on, so why is nothing happening? And there's a few responses to that. Firstly, things are happening, so take heart in noticing and knowing that there's a lot more going on the ground than you see online, and there's lots of good reasons for that, right? But there's also this like kind of level of people are not able to recognize the behaviors that are abusive, and when you take a personally abusive behavior and systematize it, then it becomes oppressive. They're not able to recognize the oppressive nature of those behaviors, those policies, because I think there are people in their lives who exhibit those behaviors, those patterns, who they feel that they are not, and this is not conscious, probably it's some deep subconscious shit. They feel they're not allowed to be angry with those people. So it's like, okay, if I admit that this government is a sham, I'm going to have to admit that my relationship with my parents is a sham. And that is going to ruin my wedding, and that's going to make things a lot harder. I might just kind of ride this one out. I think that's what people have been doing for a long time. Now we are finally seeing, I think, a turning point, no pun intended, that there is starting to be a mass reckoning, a mass remembrance of all those things that we knew were weird, but we decided couldn't be that weird because everyone was doing them. And then we realized everyone was doing them for the wrong reasons and because of the wrong people. And I think that I one day at a time, that's how I see this. I am not going to sit here and say that everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows on the other side of this. I'm not going to sit here and say that we're never going to get through this. I think we're going to get through this one day at a time, and we're going to do it together. But I think that in order to do that, we do need to improve this skill of recognizing these patterns of behaviors that are demonstrated not just in the people in power, but also in the people around us. So, I have a little bit of an outline. I'm trying something new here. Okay, so firstly, this is how memes and references operate, right? So one of my favorite memes, I guess you could call it a meme because it was originally a tweet, and it was just an out of context tweet. This guy Drill or Wint, I don't know, depending on if you know his at name or his display name. He always posts these kind of inane, bizarre, little disconnected takes, but he's grown an audience that kind of recognizes that the ridiculous things he says are linked often to actually some kind of deep satire of what's going on. So he has this famous tweet, and this is the quote. And another thing, I'm not mad. Please don't put in the paper that I'm mad. And it's like on its own, it's just a tweet, right? But what it has turned into is it has been screenshot and applied to so many instances where someone is being interviewed and what they have to say amounts to gobbledygook because what they have to support is they're not going to tell you what they're really supporting, obviously, or else we wouldn't have gotten this far. Or maybe we would have, right? The calculations they have done clearly did not encompass all of the possibilities, and I'll leave it at that. But what I am saying here is that this meme, this kind of out of nowhere, this just like little random reframing of nothing, right? It was like not in relation to anything that I know of, but it can be applied to so many things. And I think that's kind of like a microcosm of the way that these kinds of abstract concepts operate. And it's like the same thing with a reference, right? It's like if something I grew up on this weird cusp of the millennials and the Gen Z. So there's this movie that was like basically just ubiquitous for years and years and years. And now probably, I don't even know. I haven't watched it in years. It's probably, I don't know. It's probably got its moments, but it's probably got its moments that haven't aged well too. Zoolander is the movie. And for years, if there was like something that is like smaller than you expected, the proper response, right? And at least in my part of the world, part of the country was like, what is this? a computer for ants, a TV for ants, a deodorant stick for ants. I don't know. I'm just looking around the fucking room. It was like because in the movie that's like one of the funniest moments, and we just kind of held on to that framing and we applied it to different things, right? And the breakdown, I think, is what happens when we try to do that to concepts that we've been exposed to in school, because for the most part, people go to school to get through school. They don't go to school to learn. And I think that's not, once again, that doesn't really speak to the individual. That's kind of the way that the system's been designed, is to get you out, whether or not you learn how to read, whether or not you could have used extra help. They get you out on the graduation floor with as little support as possible, and then you're not their problem anymore. Right. And so when we learn these concepts in school, we're kind of in this different zone where we're mostly there to socialize, or, not me, but I was there to learn because I was a stupid nerd who didn't know that there was a different game afoot. But, it did help me in some ways. But so it's taking these kind of historical frameworks and applying them to the modern day. It's very confusing for some people. It was just like all over the internet in 2016, like, oh, you're calling them the Nazis. You're calling them Nazis. Like, pfft, what? The Nazis were a political party from 1940s who goose stepped and wore armbands. I don't see any armbands. It's like, you've completely lost the point. And maybe that was your point. Maybe your point was to lose the point intentionally, to make it sound ridiculous, even though it isn't, because maybe you want to convince people that it's ridiculous so that more people will fall down the same rabbit hole that you fell down. It's a self-replicating cycle, right? And we talk about these frameworks and like, say, toxic masculinity, right? That's a big one. You can talk about all the aspects of toxic masculinity, but then what often happens is it's not applied to the people who it applies to the most because they're the coolest. Right? So it's like there's a certain level of like where we only feel comfortable applying the frameworks to the people who we have some degree of access to. And there's a significant amount of pushback when you try to apply frameworks to someone who you don't have access to. So for example, if there's this, I won't go into details actually, but there's this creator who I see every now and then, and recently she got called out for something that she said that was seen as ableist and against her kind of stated values, and it was, I agree. But like, how could she have not seen that? Right? It's like what she does is, oh gosh, now I'm getting too specific. But in any case, there's often a question of like, does she have the right to say something ableist more than someone else has the right to push back against it? That's a big question. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I don't think that there's a lot of people who kind of go both ways. I think it's kind of you're either someone who thinks that calling out is like the number one, the best thing you can do with your time, or you're someone who thinks that like call outs are stupid and you block them all. I don't think there's many in between, except for like the lurkers and the commenters, reply guys, stuff like that. But it's like these frameworks, like we know what ableism looks like, but then we apply it to our own opinions and we don't notice, right? And it doesn't trigger that response that we have if someone else were to say it. And that's another interesting part, is like this kind of, where does what you have to say end and your impact on other people begin? And it's hard because she was just talking about herself, right? But like oh gosh, here I am going over the details. All right, I won't. I'm not trying to make it about her. This is just one example of many, and it's probably the least important one. Once again, it's just one that I had access to, right? Like, I don't have this intimate knowledge of this frameworks that conservatives work on, and I can't call them out on their supposed beliefs versus their actions, because I don't know what they want to hear. I'll say, think about the impact that has on the other person. And they'll say, well, think about the impact it has on my pocketbook. It's like we're speaking different languages, right? And there's not necessarily even that is like, that is a personal decision backed by years of personal decisions based on an economy where survival is dependent on your ability to have a full paycheck, a full pocketbook, right? And so I do think that some of these kind of frameworks would evaporate completely if we were to be able to kind of have less of a survival based society, right? I think that's obvious, and maybe they do too, right? Maybe that's why they push back so hard. And I think that has a decent part of it. But the weird thing is that it kind of hits you in different ways, right? Once you start unpacking this kind of like deep conservative mindset that has kind of overlaid itself with almost every facet of American life, you start to realize that things are a lot deeper than you ever thought they were. So, for example, I think music reveals a lot about your personality. I think the way that you think and talk about music, if you create music, that's its own thing. But on every level, kind of what you think about music reveals a lot about kind of how you see the world and your place in it. And I think it's very interesting when there are supposedly very do your own thing DIY groups and bands and genres that then turn around and gatekeep, right? It's this very interesting interaction where on some level they recognize that people shouldn't tell you what to do with your time, body, and energy, and they feel that about themselves in their relation to their communities and their jobs and what have you. But they don't make the connection that they are then imposing expectations, their own expectations, and they can base it on whatever thinkers they like throughout the ages. But all it's just doing the same thing. It's tying us back to this point of time before most of us were born. A lot of the time, there are people alive today who were seeing, Black Flag in the 80s. Hundreds, thousands even. They played hundreds of shows a year. And yet, right, it's like they were kind of doing a new thing with every album, and then all the bands, they would release an album, they would immediately start working on a new sound, because as soon as they put out an album, all the other bands would kind of try to copy their sound and try to do their take on it, right? And it's like, and that is part of how the various subgenres of punk developed, right? Is like this history of experimentation and personal artistic authenticity, and having a value system that it's deeply tied to your music and your work ethic. And then you have people 30 years later who are like, well, the only right way to do it is the way that they did it back then. And that gives me pause, right? Because it kind of feels conservative. It kind of feels like what you're saying is, don't accept the way that people tell you to use your body, energy, mind, and time, unless it has to do with the music genre that I in particular like. Then you should. And it's this it's this dynamic I struggle with so much, because it's this constant push and pull. Music will not progress if we do not have experimental sounds. And I think in a way, a lot of people know this, and they do want to do something experimental, but they see someone else doing something experimental, and they say, "Oh, that's not what I would do." That must be garbage, because what I do is deeply rooted in tradition. And it's like, well, maybe what the other person is doing is deeply rooted in different traditions that you're not aware of, right? But that doesn't really come into the picture. There's a certain level of cognitive dissonance where they're like, okay, like if there's one thing in life that I know to be true, it's that music should be this way. And I've heard the same thing about abortion, right? It's like, there's one thing I know to be true: single issue voter. It's like, okay, well, if you're a single issue voter with the way that you listen to music, then power to you. I do think that reveals some conservative tendencies. That's all. And the other thing, another aspect of this kind of conservative kind of string weaving its way through the sweater, or through the tapestry we've been creating as a society, is this idea that like some things regarding art are subjective, or no, sorry, because that's the truth. This idea that some things regarding art are objective, right? So like this is, at the time of recording, this is Geese has been getting a lot of attention recently, and I haven't even really listened to them. A couple songs, maybe. I don't know. I'm sure I'll find my way to listening to them eventually. But what I just think is really interesting is like they go on SNL, right, and they do this performance, and people are saying it's the worst performance of all time. You know, it's like just noise. But it's funny because some people will bust out this word objectively. It's like, come on, like he was objectively singing poorly. And then someone else says, no, he was objectively singing well. It's like, maybe if you both think that something is objectively opposite, then it's actually subjective, right? And it ties back to music because people get themselves into these little communities where they have the right music opinions, right? It's like everyone in their community has the right music opinions and they do too. And so they will not change so that they can stay in the community. And that is okay. That's fine. As long as you are open to the fact that everyone is doing the same thing in their other communities, right? But a lot of people miss that step. So they see something from another genre and they say, no, this is objectively bad. They share it to see, like, show people how bad it is, how funny it is, right? But that kind of shit, like, that is just, when you think something is objective and it's art, you are, I think 100% of the time, maybe 95, I'll give it 95% of the time, people are actually calling their personal framework of music and how the song interacts with it. That is what they're calling the objective part, right? It's like, objectively, he's a bad singer means objectively, I think he's a bad singer, which means that it's not objective at all. It's subjective. It's an opinion, right? And the thing is, like, you can say, like, oh, well, objectively, Bob Dylan was a bad singer, but we're still talking about Bob Dylan, right? Like, maybe he is objectively a bad singer, but maybe if millions of people really like this objectively bad singer, then his singing is actually subjective. And it's this really interesting relationship between kind of these communities of music where they will kind of be okay with certain outputs coming out of other genres, like as long as they're cool enough, but they won't be okay with others. It's like this kind of weird thing. It's like, okay, yes, you can say that Kendrick Lamar is an exceptional rapper and really like him, right? You can say he's the greatest of all time. That's fine. You can even say that's objective. I think you're wrong, right? It was like, not because I don't disagree, but because I think it's subjective. I subjectively agree. But if that is the only rap you listen to, and then you listen to other rap and you're like, this is objectively bad because it's not like Kendrick, then you're kind of inserting yourself in a weird way in this kind of like this dynamic that I don't think that people really realize they're becoming a part of, because I think if they realized, they would not want to, right? So it's like, I don't know, like you can shit talk like Lil Wayne all you want. You can call him an objectively bad rapper. The fact is, millions of people really like him. Most of them are, teenagers or were when he was coming up. And most of them don't look like me or the other people in certain communities of music that I frequent. Just because of distribution. And so it gets to this point where it's like, okay, well, if you are proposing that we all get together and laugh at how objectively bad this rap performance is, or this rap song, that starts to trigger a weirdly conservative loop where it's like, okay, you can say this is bad, but you don't really know, like you're not really part of the culture, right? Like it doesn't really mean the same thing to you that it means to, a black teenager in I forget where he's from. It was Wisconsin, right? He was going to be in the Green Bay Packers, or he wanted to be in the Green Bay Packers Super Bowl show. I might have fucked that up. Yeah, don't come at me. I might have fucked that all the way. I don't. It's actually football. I don't know much about. um, yeah, but Kendrick was the one who went on, and instead, which I think on that level, right? Maybe that was objectively the right business decision because Kendrick Lamar has more fans. It was going to bring in more money to the Super Bowl than Lil Wayne, even though it was his hometown. That doesn't mean that Kendrick has objectively better music. You can say that it's better for the times. You know, maybe Lil Wayne is still kind of writing the party music. Kendrick's writing the conscious music that's kind of changing the world, or at least he's doing his darndest to make that happen, to help the rest of us see that we can all change the world. That's kind of how I see it. But when you start to compare art, especially other people's art from what's the word? From groups that you're not a part of, then it stops being objective, right? Because it's like objectively, you know less about hip hop than people who really like Lil Wayne among all the other hip hop artists that they listen to. That's just kind of how it is, right? It's like you can say that you don't like a song, but if you are proposing that we all get together and laugh about this song that none of us are in the target demographic for, that starts to feel not just conservative, but a little racist, honestly. And I said that once in a Discord I was moderating. One of the other moderators reacted with a eye roll emoji. I was like, okay, way to miss the point. You're also not the target demographic. Like, none of us are the target demographic for this music. So if we all get together to make fun of it, it looks weird, even if it's us, right? Like, even if we all know that we're us, there's a lot of racist people who say the same thing, who say, oh, well, it's just Jimmy. He doesn't really mean it. Okay, maybe he doesn't. If you are all talking on the internet and you're letting Jimmy be Jimmy, then people who don't know that he doesn't mean it might think he does. Or maybe he does. Maybe he does mean it, and he says he doesn't mean it, but he keeps making the jokes, and he keeps making them because you keep enabling them, right? It's like this kind of like, once again, we refuse to see the dynamic, this structure of racism. We refuse to see it in our own actions, in our own lives. And it goes for so many things. Like, we know what racism looks like. It looks like the pictures that we saw in history class of the civil rights and the Martin Luther King and the marches. That's what it looks like. And not anymore, right? Like, to some extent, yes, but it's changed. And people push back against that, right? They push back against the concept that the country has changed at all, or that society has changed, or that technology has changed. You know, some people still think that anyone can edit their own pages, or even anyone else's pages on Wikipedia. Then they learn that it actually has a significant moderation team, and then that's a problem, because what if the moderators are biased? Like, okay. You know, what if they aren't? And there's people who still think if you look up symptoms for an illness, it's basically like looking up WebMD in 2008, and it's going to tell you you have cancer for the hiccups. Like that, I don't know how to tell you. It's been 20 years. You know, like, the internet has come a long way. It's changed a lot. It's a very different thing now, but the structures remain. The personality, behavioral structures, how we treat each other remains. So how do we get to the point where we are able to take these things that we're learning about and not only recognize them when the word is placed to them, and not push back when the word is placed to them, but we didn't perceive the word? So how do we not be the person trying to start a dog pile on someone we don't know? And how do we not be the person eye rolling when someone tries to stop the dog pile? That is kind of, I think if we can fix those two problems, which I mean, that's the human condition in some ways. We might spend the rest of humanity fixing those problems, and we might make a lot of progress really quickly, and then it kind of goes slowly after that. That's how I hope. So we front load the work of change because we keep kicking it down the line. I have a song like that. Kick it on down the line and call us sinners. Kick it on down the line and where's the winner? You know, we just keep doing that. We keep saying like, oh, like racism is over. Okay, fine, it's over. I want to stop hearing about it. And then it continues for 50 years, and then here we are, and then it's back. There is a lot. It's like that episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns goes to jail, and the 8 Mile, or not 8 Mile, the Green Mile character, parody type character, sucks all the evil out of him in kind of like a I don't know, like a spiritual ritual of some sort. But he turns good for a while, but then he becomes evil again, like by the end of the episode, because he accidentally left a little evil festering between his toes, and it grew back, right? That's kind of how these things work, is like if you don't stamp them out entirely, if you don't show people how to recognize them, if you don't give them the reasons to show, to know that engaging in this behavior is actually destroying yourself, they're just going to keep thinking of themselves. And the way that it is right now is that if you think about yourself and you think about other people in relation to how they can propel yourself, then that is just inherently going to get you into trouble. It's going to inherently, you're going to hurt other people, sometimes without meaning to, sometimes on purpose. Sometimes you'll get caught saying something and you won't get called out for it, and then you start getting paranoid, and then you start attacking the other person. That happens. It's this kind of like this just incredibly strange dynamic, where I just think if we can learn how to take these abstract concepts and not need the word, right? It's like the word is less important. It packages the idea up in kind of one little phrase. But if you don't really know what it means, and if you don't see how it applies to the modern day, then a lot of these things do become buzzwords. And I hate people who are like, oh, the buzzwords, they only know how to use buzzwords. It's like, yeah, well, when some people use buzzwords, they're using them as buzzwords. When other people use buzzwords, they're using them to refer to the word in its meaning. And if you're uncomfortable with that meaning, you don't have a full grasp on that meaning. It is going to sound like buzzwords. It's going to sound like nonsense. But sometimes, 5 buzzwords in a row can be the exact correct way of describing a situation. Like, I think the bell hook says something like that. Just like America is a ... And it's like every word has books written about it. Every word has entire books, entire fields of research dedicated to just that word, just describing how it works. And a lot of people I don't know if they don't realize that there's that level of depth, or they just don't go looking for it. But the result is the same, right? It's that they just end up not being able to apply it in their own lives. And so you see the manipulative behaviors that are being exhibited by the people in power. And a lot of people, I think their personal family situations, social life, friendship circles are so reminiscent of those behaviors that they cannot recognize the behaviors coming out of the top without then recognizing that the same behaviors are being exhibited by the people who they claim to care about, who they claim cares about them. And if that conflicts with their inner judgment, that can cause a lot of psychological pain. That is cognitive dissonance, another buzzword, whole field of psychological research. I should know more about that. All I know is it's like it stops people from making the right decision because they're so invested in the it's like if I were to have an opinion and become so invested in the me who has that opinion that if someone threatened that opinion, it would threaten me. That's how people feel. And it's not just the people who are still holding on to the last gasps of power. It's not just those people. It is everywhere. It's like, if I accept that that behavior is wrong coming from that person, then I have to apply it to the person I care about that I'm not supposed to be angry with. So either I'm going to become a hypocrite by applying it to the stranger and not the friends, or I'm going to have to apply it to both or neither. And people are very comfortable with all of those options except for applying it to both. And it gets people stuck in these terrible situations where you know the behavior is abusive, but admitting that feels like it would cause more problems than just living with it, right? That's fucked up.